I wasn't actively looking for a job when the opportunity came up. But after a few months of bouncing between temp work and odd jobs, the steady paycheck of a full-time gig, even as a cemetery groundskeeper, seemed like the right move. When I saw the posting online, the thought of working nights in a graveyard wasn't exactly ideal, but the job paid well, and the hours fit my unpredictable schedule. What caught me off guard was how quickly everything happened. The manager called me within hours of applying, sounding overly eager to meet. His voice was deep, gravelly, as if he had spent a lifetime in that cemetery, breathing in the cold night air. He introduced himself as Mr. Grayson and seemed oddly pleased with my application. "Well, we need someone tonight," Grayson had said over the phone, his tone almost conspiratorial. "If you can meet me at the cemetery by dusk, the job's yours." "Tonight?" I asked, glancing at the clock. It was already 5 p.m. "That's kind of quick, isn't it?" "It is," Grayson said, his voice calm but insistent. "But I've got a feeling about you. You seem like the right kind of man for this. Let's just say, it's important we fill this position urgently." I hesitated for a moment, but something about the way he spoke made me curious. He wasn't pushy, but there was an underlying seriousness that I couldn't shake. And the money was good, better than anything else I'd find in such short notice. "All right," I said. "I'll take it." "Good," Grayson said, almost too quickly. "Meet me at St. Martin's Cemetery. I'll be in the caretaker's office by the gate." An hour later, I found myself pulling up to the entrance of St. Martin's. The cemetery was older than I expected. Ancient stone walls surrounded it, with iron gates that creaked loudly in the evening breeze. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, as the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the hills, casting long, creeping shadows across the grounds. Grayson was already waiting for me in the small office near the gate. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair slicked back and a weathered face that looked as if it had seen more than its fair share of years. His eyes were sharp, though, darting around the room as if he was constantly alert, even standing still. "Ah, you made it," Grayson said, shaking my hand with a surprisingly firm grip. "Good to have you. I won't keep you too long. I know it's already getting late." I followed him inside, and he handed me a set of keys, a flashlight, and a worn, leather-bound notebook. It felt heavier than it looked, its pages thick with age. There was something unsettling about the way he gave it to me, like it held some secret I wasn't supposed to know yet. "The flashlight's your best friend. Batteries are fresh. Notebooks for notes, of course, but more importantly, it has a list of rules you need to follow during your shift." "Rules?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of rules?" Grayson gave me a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Strange ones, I'll admit. This job's a bit different. But trust me, as long as you follow the rules, you'll be fine." "Right," I muttered, flipping through the notebook. "This isn't some kind of hazing thing, is it?" Grayson shook his head, his expression now completely serious. "You'll see soon enough. The cemetery's a strange place at night. Just make sure you do what the list says. No exceptions." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't want to look like I was already spooked before my first shift had even started. Grayson gave me a few more instructions about locking the gates and making rounds, then excused himself, saying he had another matter to attend to elsewhere in town. "I'll be back by dawn," he said, and without another word, he disappeared into the dark. I stood there for a moment, alone in the office. The weight of the night ahead settled on my shoulders as the quiet of the cemetery closed in around me. The wind howled softly through the trees, and I could hear the distant rustle of leaves. Pulling up a chair, I set the notebook on the desk and opened it to the first page. The list of rules was written in neat, small handwriting, probably Grayson's. As I read through them, the uneasy feeling in my gut grew. Rules for the night shift at St. Martin's Cemetery. Rule 1. Always keep the main gate locked after dark. Even if you hear knocking, do not open it until dawn. Rule 2. Every hour, make a full round of the cemetery. Use the flashlight to check for any disturbances. If the light flickers in front of a grave, make a mark in the notebook. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you while making your rounds, do not turn around. Continue walking and ignore the sound. It will stop eventually. Rule 4. At midnight, go to the large oak tree in the center of the cemetery and place a stone on the ground in front of it. Do not look up at the branches. Rule 5. If you see a figure standing near the mausoleum, leave immediately and return to the office. Stay inside until 2 a.m. before resuming your rounds. Rule 6. Should you hear someone calling your name, no matter how familiar the voice, do not answer. They are not who they claim to be. Rule 7. If the temperature suddenly drops and your breath becomes visible, return to the office and stay there for 15 minutes. Do not leave until the cold passes. Rule 8. At 3 a.m., you may hear crying near the east fence. Do not investigate. The crying will stop after a few minutes. Rule 9. If, during your rounds, you encounter a man wearing a black hat, avoid eye contact. Nod politely and continue walking. Do not speak to him. I read through the list again, my mind racing. This had to be a joke, right? It felt like something straight out of a horror movie, rules that didn't make any sense, designed to mess with the new guy. But as I sat there, the silence of the cemetery pressing in around me, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. Grayson didn't seem like the kind of man who would joke about something like this. His warning about following the rules, no exceptions, rang in my ears. With a sigh, I shoved the notebook into my jacket pocket and stood up. I might as well start making rounds. If nothing else, it would keep me busy and maybe ease the weird feeling gnawing at me. At around 9 p.m., I started my first round. The cemetery was larger than I thought. Row after row of gravestones stretched out in every direction, some of them so old they were barely legible. Trees cast long shadows across the paths, and the wind stirred the leaves in a constant, low murmur. I walked the perimeter first, keeping my flashlight trained on the gravestones. Everything seemed normal, just your typical graveyard at night. But the deeper I walked into the cemetery, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't cold exactly, but there was a chill that seemed to settle into my bones. I checked my watch as I completed the first round. It was just after 10 p.m. So far, nothing weird had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just out of sight. The second round was quieter. The wind had died down, and the cemetery was still. Too still. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked. But every now and then, I'd catch the faintest echo of something else, like footsteps trailing behind me. I tried not to think about rule number 3. I kept my pace steady, my eyes forward, and ignored the occasional tap-tap of what sounded like someone following me. It wasn't until I reached the older section of the cemetery that my flashlight flickered. I stopped in my tracks. The beam of light danced and wavered in front of a particularly worn grave. its stone cracked and covered in moss. The name had long since eroded, leaving only faint impressions of letters. I made a mark in the notebook just like the rules said, and quickly moved on. My pulse was racing now, every nerve on edge. I've checked my watch and it was already midnight. This was the part I was dreading. The large oak tree stood in the center of the cemetery, its twisted branches stretching out like gnarled arms. Even in the darkness, it was impossible to miss. It towered over everything else, ancient and imposing. I approached the tree cautiously, a small stone in my hand, just like the rule instructed. I had no idea what the purpose of this ritual was, but I wasn't about to test it. I bent down to place the stone in front of the tree, my hand shaking slightly as I set it on the ground. Then, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. I froze. Something told me not to look up. The branches swayed and creaked above me, but I kept my eyes fixed on the ground. I could feel someone, watching from the tree. The weight of a presence bore down on me, cold and oppressive. I finished placing the stone and backed away, careful not to lift my gaze. The urge to look was overwhelming, like an itch I couldn't scratch, but I fought against it. I wasn't going to break the rule. By the time I returned to the office, my hands were trembling. I sat down at the desk, trying to steady my breathing. The rules were no joke. Something was happening in this cemetery, something I didn't understand. After about an hour during my fourth round is when I saw it, the figure. The mausoleum stood at the far end of the cemetery, surrounded by tall iron gates. As I approached, my flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing near the entrance, a dark silhouette, motionless. I stopped dead in my tracks. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, barely visible in the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I remembered rule number 5. If you see a figure near the mausoleum, leave immediately. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the silhouette. My mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? But the fear crawling up my spine felt too real. I turned and walked quickly back toward the office, resisting the urge to break into a run. Once I was inside, I locked the door and checked my watch. It was only 1:30 a.m. I had to wait until 2 a.m. before resuming my rounds, so I sat there in the dim light, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The figure had been too still, too unnatural to be a person, and yet it had felt like someone or something was watching me. I forced myself to continue making rounds, even though my nerves were shot. The cemetery was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. Even the wind had died down completely. At 3 a.m., I heard it. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on the breeze, the sound of crying drifted from the east fence. I stopped, my heart racing, and listened. The crying grew louder, more distinct, a woman's voice, soft and broken. I knew the rule: do not investigate. But the sound tugged at something deep inside me, a primal urge to help, to see who was out there in the darkness. I took a step forward, then stopped. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was doing. This was exactly what the rules warned me about. Whatever was crying out there wasn't human. Not anymore. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, listening to the sobbing. It echoed in the stillness, growing louder and more desperate until it was almost unbearable. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing down on me like a weight. I turned back toward the office, my legs weak and unsteady. I thought I was in the clear. The crying had stopped. The figure by the mausoleum was gone, and the rounds were uneventful for the next hour. But just as I was making my way back to the office for the final time, I saw him. A man, standing by one of the graves, wearing a black hat. He was facing away from me, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were paying his respects to the dead. But something about the way he stood was wrong. His posture was too rigid, too unnatural, like a statue carved from stone. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Rule number 9, avoid eye contact. Nod politely and continue walking. Do not speak to him. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. My flashlight flickered in my hand, and for a split second, I thought he turned his head slightly as if sensing my presence. I forced myself to move, nodding slightly as I passed, keeping my eyes fixed on the path ahead. My skin crawled as I felt his gaze on me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. I just kept walking. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the cemetery, I was sitting in the office, my hands still trembling. The night had been a blur of fear, confusion, and strange, unsettling encounters. I couldn't explain what had happened, but one thing was clear. This place was far from normal. Grayson returned just as the sun broke over the horizon. He looked at me with a knowing expression, as if he could see the fear etched into my face. "You did well," he said, nodding slightly. "Not everyone makes it through their first night." I wanted to ask him about the rules, about the figures I'd seen, about the crying woman, but the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, staring at him, trying to process everything. Grayson smiled faintly, handing me a cup of coffee. "Welcome to the graveyard shift, kid. You'll get used to it." I wasn't sure I wanted to get used to it, but as I looked out over the cemetery, now bathed in the soft glow of morning light, I knew one thing for certain. I would never look at the dead the same way again. And the rules? I wouldn't dare break them. Not after what I'd seen.